Hi, Sami here, and this is the Career Kickstart Show. Today's episode is going to be, I'm going to say a treat for the ears, because I don't know what we're talking about yet, but I know it's going to be interesting because I got Lexi Butler on my show. Now, if you are not hip with the kids, hip to the wild world of women in tech, then you might not know Lexi. However, she has been moving and shaking and doing some crazy stuff. She started the Sista Circle, which is a online community for Black women in tech. She has like her own video channel. Like, she's just doing lots of stuff. So I'm not even like scratching the surface. So Lexi, how about you give me your elevator pitch and then we go from there, because there's going to be a lot we're going to talk about. So let's jump in.
Of course. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited for this. This is like the ice cream topper to my week. So yeah, my name is Lexi B. I currently work in the technology industry, and I always tell people that when I grow up, I would like to Blackify spaces and encourage people to be their authentic selves while still being very successful in their career.
Ooh, I love it. That is a good elevator pitch. People take note. Your elevator pitch needs to be like a power statement. Like, Lexi, when you said that, I imagined you immediately went into some power pose and somehow had a white suit on. I don't know if that happened, but in my head, that's what that sounded like. So everybody, good elevator pitch. But how did you start to do this? You know, you said that you wanted to Blackify these spaces. Did you stand up one day in the back of the history class and somebody was like, oh my God, we need to make this kid the president of some sort of club, give her something to do? Like, were you always precocious, or was it like you were a slacker one day and then you looked around and you're like, man, I can't keep smoking pot underneath the bleachers. Sack. I need to do something with my life. How did this start? Tell us about baby Lexi.
I think, well, at least my parents say that baby Lexi was always a freedom fighter, right? I think that when you are a person of color in America, there's a day in your life when you realize you're a person of color. And unfortunately, many times it is by other people saying derogatory things about what your skin looks like. And this goes for all people that are not white. Mm-hmm. And so for me, as a child, I spent a little bit of my childhood in New Orleans, and I had this amazing best friend who was this white girl named Laura. And I came home one day and I said, why am I a different color than Laura? So I had a very privileged identity situation where it wasn't somebody telling me that I was Black or that I was different, but it was me recognizing that me and my friend were different. Mm-hmm. And so my parents sat me down and told me, they were like, there's different flavors and different races and different types of people around the world. And that's what makes us beautiful. And I think at around 3 or 4 years old, I became very ingrained in that, and almost to the point of obsession. And so I was always the kid, even as a very small child in kindergarten, first grade, that recognized these differences. And because of that, had many questions to why they're there and why people treated me different because of who I was. And so in kindergarten, my nickname was Malcolm X. They called me Baby Malcolm, right? Because my parents were trying to explain to me this whole idea of Blackness in America. But obviously, when you're 6 or 7, you can only internalize so much of it. So, they told me stories of Malcolm X and Rosa Parks and MLK. Mm-hmm. And there was a situation at school where, little kids, they take turns being the front of the line. And it was my turn to be in the back of the line. And I nicely told my white teacher that I refused to do that because Rosa Parks already did that. So that was my understanding of race. And I went to an all-white school. So I was one of very few people that looked like me. So race and me have always had this very interesting dynamic because I've always seen it and I've always been part of it. And I've always been on the receiving end of the oppressive side of it, but also the receiving end of the beauty of it. And so growing up, that's all that I saw. And that's all that I wanted to discuss. And I wanted to really get down in the weeds of why is it that for whatever reason, people do not feel like they can be their best self in situations, right? Why is it, as a girl who grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, that when people ask me to describe myself and I say I'm a proud Black woman, that brings stares and oohs and ahs, right? Why is that an issue for people? And that's always really kind of been my journey, even growing up as an adult, is really trying to understand what are the nuances of race, and not just talking about the high level ones. We all know those, right? But just the idea of a person walking in a room and saying, I'm proud to be Black, or I'm proud to be queer, or I'm proud to be an immigrant, right? Why is it that that's a problem? Why does that hold us back? Why is that person considered aggressive when they claim their own identity?
Wow. Lexi, you as a child is a real deep thinker. I feel like I had like a horse folder. I feel like I had, not that much depth about too much, but I was a late bloomer. So you were like this very aware child, which I feel like is both a benefit and also a burden.
Oh my God, yeah. My parents, blessed them, because I'm sure there were many times where we had to have hard conversations. My parents were always in the principal's office. I remember there was one episode where I told everyone in preschool that Santa Claus wasn't real, and my parents got called in, right? Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I have this beautiful image of young baby Lexi just standing in the back of the class being like, "Sheeple, open your eyes! They're lying to us about the fat man." Basically. But also, to be frank, many times very lonely, right? Because I was not like other kids. So it was very hard for me to build lots of friendships among people because I was just considered like this 10-year-old who spoke like an 85-year-old, right? So now looking back on it at 30, I'm like, I was a dope kid. But as a child, I have to admit there was a lot of bullying and a lot of just misunderstanding because I didn't understand that kids thought Santa Claus was real. And they didn't understand why I would not think that a big man would come through my chimney and give me gifts. I'm like, that's stalkerish. But yeah, very interesting dynamic. You know what? When you really break it down, it does seem like a stranger danger situation.
Right? Like, why are we telling children this?
For this, what I find is interesting is that you're talking about, growing up, like, did you say it was a private school that you went to in New Orleans?
Yeah, I went to a private Montessori school. So the early years of my education were in New Orleans. And then when I turned 6, my parents moved to St. Louis, which is where they're from, and in the city they fell in love in. So I really grew up around a lot of family and stuff, but I still went to a white, privileged, private institution from 6 years old until graduation. It was a very interesting experience. Yeah, that should be a book.
Yeah, well, that's different, I guess, if we're talking about the different intersections of privilege and I guess not privilege and stuff like that. That gives you kind of like a different dynamic than I suppose many people come to. This whole topic and conversation, was that uncomfortable as you're going through to college and you're meeting new people and maybe how you see class and race might be different? How, like for me in college, one of my roommates who was the first person that wasn't like a sibling that I moved out with, she's now a social worker, and she came from a pretty wealthy Black family, where her mother was a noted psychologist, her dad was an engineer. So coming to the U of A was different for her because she met people who she wanted to have a kindredship with because they were both Black, but she came to, I guess, this because she had the thing where a lot of white kids, in Arizona, it's like white and Mexican, but like, she came to it being like, oh man, I get to meet more Black people. And then she kind of felt like, oh, some people were calling her white or things like that, which obviously as a white person, my depth of knowledge is very academic. It's not lived, of course. But was that something that maybe you struggled with, or maybe that was the thing? I'm sorry if my question is up to you.
No, that's a great question. It's a great question because I think it's really important in talking about identity, right? I think so many times we look at identity only as race, so what you look like, language, where you come from, right? Sexuality, who are you interested in, and gender. And that's definitely not the case, right? Like this identity thing is very convoluted and complex and there's layers. I think for me was that Monday through Friday, I was in this all white environment. Friday at 6 p.m. to the weekend, I was with my Black family that comes from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, right? So my mom and dad are both from St. Louis, and they actually met when they were in high school. So I came from this very perplexing environment. So I learned how to code switch. I learned who I was and what I was. And while I didn't have the language to understand it at like 15 or 16, looking back on it, I understand that it was my parents' way of showing me the layers to me, right? My dad's first generation college. So it's very like this plethora and this mix of what's really going on. And then I ended up going to Stanford University which is a very privileged university. And the funny thing about Stanford is when I went, the Black community was 13%, which is quite large for a university like Stanford. And the majority of the Black kids that I was with had a similar background to me. So Stanford was great because I got to network and fellowship and build these relationships with all types of people from all over the world, regardless of color. My college group of friends and I are all very different. We're like the United Shades of Benetton. But the Black kids specifically, most of us, what we loved about building these relationships where we were like, oh, wait, so you were the only Black kid at a white school too? Wow, right? So it was the first time for us to come together and say, oh, so somebody else in the world had a very similar experience as me in high school. And let's talk about that and let's figure that out because there's a lot of trauma with that being the only one in a sea of others. So I really didn't have that because the school that I went to, we were all coming from the same background for the most part. But yeah.
No, that's really awesome. And was it in Stanford that you decided that there was a need for the Sister Circle, or was that maybe something that came later? Where was the seeds for that desire to create this community?
Yeah. So I graduated in 2011. Never wanted to go into tech, just happened to fall into it. And so again, observing and watching people and being probably too deep into things, I recognized very early in my first tech company that I was the only one. But then on top of it, I recognized in the tech company that I was at was that they didn't have any new college grad programs. So a lot of companies nowadays, they have like new college grad programs because they're aware that when you graduate from college between the ages of 21 and 23, like you can barely spell your name. College does not teach you how to be an adult. It teaches you how to think, and it gives you a very expensive piece of paper. But there are no classes in most colleges like how to do your taxes, right? How to socialize with people you don't know, things like that. And so the company that I went to, they didn't have that. And so I think for the first 5-6 years of my career, what I was focused on was a new college grad community. Because I was like, yes, I'm the only Black person here, but I'm also 22 and I don't know what is going on in the world and this sucks. And I'm like slowly getting depressed and I have no friends. And how do I navigate just growing up, right? And then after I started doing a lot of that work, so I started a new college grad program at the company that I was at. I started an online magazine in an attempt just to write how I felt every day or every other day. And then invited writers, friends of mine from college, friends that I had met at my company and said, let's just write about our experiences growing up and how it sucks. And maybe we can find some tips and tricks from people. And then I moved tech companies. And I think moving to another tech company, I thought that moving to that company would fix all of my issues and fix all of my fears, right? About growing up, about being Black, about being a woman in a space that doesn't have a lot of women, more or less Black women. Coming into tech was the first time that like it really hit me. You know, I've always been a proud woman. I come from parents who always told me that I can do anything a boy can do. But it really wasn't until I graduated and started working in tech where I would be in rooms of people and be the only woman. Like, let's not even discuss race. Just be the only woman. Mm-hmm. That was terrifying to me, right? And so I moved to the second company. And then I said, you know what? It's interesting how nepotism is real. And when I talk to all these people, they say things like, oh, well, my friend got that job, or my friend got a job at this company because their roommate works there and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, you know, Black women, we don't have this kind of like innate network, or at least to my knowledge. And so in April 2017, I literally sat in my Oakland apartment with my puppy. And I said, what happened if I just invited 10 Black women who work in tech? And I said, let's go to brunch. And then at brunch, I say, okay, we're going to do this again in a couple months, and I want each of you to bring someone. So it really was my selfish way of saying, I need to know all the Black women in the tech industry, and I want to know them more than just their title. I want to know, what are they allergic to? And I want to know, are they a mom? And I want to know, are they from St. Louis or are they from New York? And I want to be able to ask questions, and I want to be able to fill my life with these amazing women that can help me just grow and be an adult. And so that small idea now has almost 3,000 women around the world representing almost 70 countries and 35 languages. And it's like this really amazing place right? A safe space for these women to talk about anything. A lot of it is job and tech related, like, oh, my company's hiring, you should look at this. But just now before this interview, somebody literally wrote and said, hey, my sister works in government, but she wants to get into tech. Here is her resume. Who wants to look over this until we can kind of figure this out? And there's already 10 comments, right? And so what happens when you just put people together that have a couple of similarities, but also have a very similar struggle, and say, you are welcome to be your authentic self. And when you allow people to be their authentic selves, then you also allow them to feel safe in uplifting others. And that's what Sista Circle is.
I love that. And the thing is, I'm going to say that as someone who has done similar like leadership and community building, that it's not easy. You say a lot about how the community's building this, the people are engaged, and it's a growing thing, but it takes a lot to be that person that starts this. Because I don't know from personal experience, of course, how this might play in the Black community, but I know that for, in the queer community, when you do these leadership opportunities, it can be difficult because you put yourself almost as a target to where, like, at least for the LGBT, all of them down the line, it becomes sort of a jostling thing of who should be centered, who should not, who's included, who's not. And it can be really kind of stressful as an organizer.
Yeah.
Did you deal with any of these stresses, or people like calling out your legitimacy? Like, how dare you, Lexi? How dare you be the one?
Right.
Was that something that was present? Was it not? Tell me how that growing into a leadership role and dealing with maybe some pushback, if that happened at all. I know I asked like 10 billion questions.
No. These are fantastic questions. So the answer is yes, yes, and yes. The answer also is it still happens. I think that there's a couple of things there. Yes, people are going to do that. But as my grandmother used to always tell me, they talked about Jesus. So you think they're not going to talk about you, right? And so I think that you have to really understand that people have a right to have their opinion. I have a right to respond or not to respond, or how I like to respond, right? So there's that first step, and people have a lot of opinions. I think second step is that with Sista Circle, what I try to do is I am as inclusive as I can be with the group. So I always tell people, if you identify as a woman and identify as Black, come one, come all. And I'm also aware, though, that being a Black woman, there's like 18,000 sub-communities within that. And so working with my dear friend and the head of events for Sista Circle, Isa Cespedes, who happens to be an Afro-Latina queer woman, right? Making sure that we have events that really cater to that as well. So a good example is that last year for International Women's Day, we did a whole event based on queer Black women, right? Because I am aware as an ally that a queer Black woman's experience is very, very different than mine. And I need to sit down and learn how I can support that experience. What do I need to do? What do I say? What do I not say? How can I support? Is it money? Is it emotional? It is making sure that we highlight them, right? And so through the events in Sista Circle, because we have so many people, I really allow the group to be very organic. And then we have about 6 to 7 events throughout the year that are 100% with Sista Circle leadership, partnering with major companies like Instagram and Slack and the Her app, which is a queer woman app, and things like that, and LinkedIn and Microsoft, and coming together and saying, how are we actually showcasing a specific sub-community of Black women or all Black women? But in the group, whenever I write in the group, whenever I speak about it, all the members are very aware that I'm very open to this concept of what is identity and how do we have that conversation. I think it's very important to understand that Black is not monolithic, and neither is womanhood. So if you identify as Black and you identify as a woman, who am I to tell you that you're not?
And this is, for people who are listening that might not have done this sort of work before, that balancing act is very difficult, especially for the fact that you have international chapters. And now, when I have traveled doing the digital nomad thing, I've known many people in different countries who, they're Black. but their experience is very different from the Black experience in America. Like I have a friend whose family are Nigerian immigrants to like London, but how she says it is she says, I am from London first, I'm English second, and I'm Black third, which is pretty different, I would think, from just what I have read and talked about with friends that I have who are Black Americans. How does that sort of international flavor work, especially when we have so many international incidents, whether it's, in Brazil, they have a large Black population. They're dealing with their president who makes Trump seem like freaking Tom Brokaw,
Right.
And then you got Brexit and people in England and everything like that. They're dealing with Brexit situations. The Grenfell, I think they're towers where they had a problem where people weren't checking how the towers and the tenements were in this part of London because it had a lot of poverty. It had a lot of immigrants, it had a lot of people of color. How do you navigate having an international audience when the Black experience worldwide is so varied and so different, and these issues of Blackness hits on them different ways because of how that Black experience grew in those different countries? I know that's a giant thing, but how do you handle those international things? Because as me, as just like a random white person, like just being a listener, I'm like, holy shit, this is complex.
It's very complex. And it's funny because we always have these discussions. So yes, Black is not monolithic. Say it one more time and you're right. So we do have people that live in London with Ghanaian parents as immigrants, first generation immigrants, right? So what I always tell in the group is that I cannot tell you how to identify. I identify as Black first and foremost till the day that I die. I love being Black. I think being Black is one of the most amazing things about who I am. I thank God and all the ancestors every day that they made me this way, and they have given me the privilege to walk a life with the ancestry of what that means. But at the end of the day, I am Black American. So I can come from my perspective, but I'm also aware, and I will also create a table for other people to have their perspectives of what Blackness is. I think our group, we have bylaws, we have rules and regulations that definitely stemmed from conversations that swayed to an extent of, okay, this is getting a little out of hand. And rule number one is be understanding and be compassionate, and know that people's differing opinions does not mean that yours are wrong, because Blackness is so, so, so big and so diverse. And I think what we need to do more in the greater Black community is have these conversations, because one of the ways I think that people look at colonization and oppression as this one major thing. The thing about colonization and oppression, why it's so successful, is that it's not about separating people of different races. It's really about separating people who look the same and then breaking that foundation down and breaking that unity down and then separating them because of race. So number one, race was created by white men, right, to dominate the world. So the only reason why I identify as Black is because some white man in 1300 said, these people look Black. That is the only reason. Before that, we didn't have races, right? People had languages, people had culture, people had tribes, but we didn't have this idea of race. And so I think that people of varying races, we need to sit down more often and discuss like, okay, so the white patriarchy says that we look alike, but clearly we're not. So currently, the only similarity that we have is the oppression that they have given us. So why are we different, sis? Okay, and why are we the same? And that's what I want with Sista Circle. I don't want to have easy conversation. I want to have complex conversation. And I want those boundaries literally to be, come with an open heart, come with an open mind, and speak compassionately, right? I want to have conversations about Black Americans and talk about West Africans and the history, right, of that. Because imagine being Black American and knowing that at some point your enslaved ancestor was put on a boat and shipped to America. And that's how Black American culture started. But you do have this very interesting gray tie to West Africa. And so having those conversations, right? And these are the conversations that I had as a child and still today at my dinner table, which some people think is pretty crazy, but that was just how my family worked. And I want to have them more often with people, with adults, and to say, so how can we move forward? And ultimately, like, how can we heal? Because that's the issue, right? I think that a lot of times people come to this table with trauma. And it's like, so you're upset because of your trauma, but I am who I am, and I'm not going to change who I am. And you are who you are, and you're not going to change who you are. And that's okay. But what needs to happen is I need to sit down and shut up and hear about who you are and why you are and what made you get there and how you got there, and also vice versa. So then we can be unified within our differences.
I feel like your dinner parties are probably something where people leave being like, oh my gosh, I learned more from that than like 3 years of social studies.
I hope so.
When you were talking, for folks who might not, because for me, this might be my weird thing, but I know because I don't have lived experience in this sort of way, when I'm trying to like go beyond that intellectual discourse, because you can read Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack all day long, and it might not absorb. But what always has helped me is fiction and movies and stuff. And for folks who are maybe trying to think how this concept of race, because I know that's difficult for folks because we immediately get defensive depending on where we are. One good thing to watch, because fiction kind of eases that distance, is to check out, and I don't know why I thought about this, but the show American Gods. If you haven't seen it, in the first season, there's this really good scene where Orlando Jones, who's freaking, I'm going to just say fucking, Orlando Jones is fucking on fire in American Gods. He plays this African god who is called Mr. Nancy, but his name's something else. And there's this scene where he's on this slave ship and there's a guy who's praying to him, and he like goes in where he's like, you're black now. Then the guy who's enslaved, he's like, what are you freaking talking about? I'm stuck on a boat. I'm not a color right now. I'm trying to get off this boat, and you're supposed to help me because we've been praying to your ass. But he goes through the discussion of race. He also then frees them all, and they kill all these Dutch guys. So it's a very crazy scene, but I suggest everybody check it out if you're trying to figure out on an emotional level what you're saying, Lexi, because you're bringing a lot to the table. But it also feels like in the mix of discussing maybe these traumas, these oppressions, these hurts, you're also talking about healing. Is there any part of that? Like maybe I'm just projecting, but is that like a part of the Sister Circle?
Oh my God, yeah. I think that we have to heal. I think that trauma is genetic, right? And so I'm like, y'all, if you're trying to make babies, if you accidentally make a baby, if you don't even want to have children, you don't want to make babies, you're an adult. And so you're going to be influencing babies in some capacity. So whether it's your neighbor, whether it's your god kid, whether it's your niece or your nephew or your baby cousin, we have to find a way to work through all this stuff. And obviously you can't work through it in a lifetime, right? We're talking about generations and centuries of stuff. And a lot of it very horrific stuff. Trauma is horrific. Regardless of how you cut it and where you come from, trauma is horrific. But what I want to do as a human, I always tell people, when I leave this earth, all I want to know is that what I've given to the earth is something better than I had. So whether or not I can take away all the trauma for the next generation, if I can take away a slither of it, if I can at least show that it exists, any of those things, that's the most important thing to me, right? The first step is acknowledging, like, this is here. And so I think with Sister Circle, what it does through tech and through all these amazing events is that it brings people together. And before we even talk about trauma, it says, hey, you are from London, born and raised. Your parents are from Ghana. Okay, so what happens when this person from Oakland comes over to London for work and y'all have dinner? What happens? I don't care if you talk about Drake. I don't care if you talk about trauma. I don't care if you talk about Beyonce. But what happens in that 2-hour conversation, right? So hopefully the idea is that you leave at the end of that conversation and you're like, oh my gosh, I have a friend who lives in Oakland. She's so dope, right? Or like, oh my gosh, I now have a pen pal in London. And then over time, right, it takes time. What happens when you see people as just humans, right, with different experiences? And then you are willing to communicate and you are willing to listen and actively listen to why those experiences have shaped them and the lessons you can learn from that.
I love this. And I love how this all started with food. I know this is a flippant point, but I feel like food's really important. And this space, it's not just a place on the web. It's not just like these ad hoc meetings. It's the fact that there is a movement and a presence and welcoming arms.
Yes.
You know, especially in tech, because I've worked with a lot of tech professionals. I do the career coaching thing and I enjoy it, but I know that working with some of those folks, especially some of these web devs who maybe aren't as self-aware, maybe they're just not good at socializing. I mean, I joke that I teach web devs how to human, and that's something where, especially if you come from female socialization, especially if you come from a socialization that has a lot to do with family and togetherness, as you know, from what I've been able to see and observe is very true in the Black community. That's always something that I've always felt is very special about Black women. And it's why when I vote, I always see who Black women are polling most for, because I feel like this might be flippant, but Black women are really sensible. And if you look at their choices for voting, they were all good decisions. When we go down the line, you know what I mean? You can trust. And, you know, but it can be difficult when you walk into tech spaces because there's not always that same thing. It can be very individualized. It can be like where you're dealing with people like everybody was the smartest kid in their class and now they're jockeying for a position now. And it's just a brain measuring race. So it can be very lonely. Now, I know that I'm kind of rambling right now and we're getting to the end of the interview, but I really felt like you brought a lot of gold. And I want to make sure that before we end, because we've talked a lot about your story and the Sister Circle, I want to get maybe an action tip or two from you for Black women, for women of color, just for any old woman out there, or maybe some male allies. What are some tips that you have for career development and how to build community in career? Because I feel like that's something that everybody should be in on, whether you have like an identity affiliation or whatever. We all are in this together. So what are your tips for that?
I would say first and foremost, you need to find a community. Rome was not built in a day, neither was Beyonce, and you will not be successful in your career or your personal life unless you have people behind you lifting you up, right? There is an old saying that says it takes a village to raise a child. And now I tell all my mentees that it takes a village and a tribe to raise an adult, right? So if you want to be successful, first and foremost, you have to acknowledge and honor the fact that your success is riding on everyone else. It's not just you. You can't be on an island by yourself. That's the first thing. I would say the second thing is that once you find that community, you need to give the community the same thing that they're giving you. So just as much as you have these mentors and you have these elders and maybe your parents and your parents' friends, and you have people your age uplifting you, you have to give back to the community and do the same thing. So find out, what can I do to help someone else? It can be as simple as a phone call. It can be as simple as a text message. It can be as simple as talking to someone who's 3 years younger than you for 30 minutes and them asking you, how did you get to where you are? And I think a lot of times people are very selfish and they get to the understanding that they need people to help them, but then they're so involved in their own life that they do not bring it back. And so those are my two things. So you need to find your people, right? And your people do not have to be the same race as you or identify the same way as you do, but find the people that see the potential and want to help you, but then also go find other people that you can do the same for them. And I think it'd be a very interesting world if more people did that.
I agree. And I think those are fabulous, fabulous suggestions, not just because it's good for humanity, but also, as you alluded to earlier in the show, most people find their jobs through networking. Like, let's be real, everybody. Nobody wants to hire a rando. They'd rather hire somebody's cousin that they're like, well, you know, we like your cousin, so we're going to like this guy. You know, right. That's how it is. That's why we need to have communities. No man can be an island because islands don't get jobs.
Right.
At best, they get bought by Johnny Depp, or at worst, climate change pushes them under the ocean. Lexi, you have been fabulous on my show. I would pick your brain for a very long time, you know, but I know that you got so much going on. And if you have any last words or any, like, because you're good, man, you're good. You know what you're talking about. I can definitely see why when you started the Sister Circle, nobody started a coup, you know.
Crossing fingers, not yet.
Well, I bet nobody's going to mutiny, but I'll knock on wood. But thank you so much for being on the show. This has been great.
Thank you so much, Sami. And you know what? Kudos to you. What you're doing, how you're building community, how you're bringing all these amazing people together to tell their story. You are a freedom fighter in your own right. And I did want to say that publicly. You're doing amazing work, and I'm proud of you. And I'm honored just to know you even through Facebook. And please let me know how I can support you.
Oh my God, Lexi, you're like a freaking angel. You're too precious for this world, Lexi.
Serious though, let me know, because you're doing some amazing stuff and I'm excited to watch you do it and what happens to it. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh my God, Lexi, you're like the woke bae we don't deserve, but we desperately need.
That's amazing.
Well, Lexi, I forgot to ask you, where can people find you online, find the Sister Circle, give everybody the rundown?
So basically, Twitter and Instagram is naturally Lexi27. It's very simple. LinkedIn, you can find me by my government name, which is Alexandria Butler. Just search for me. I'll be there. And then I have a new weekly video series called Unfiltered by Lexi B, which you can find on YouTube, which actually kind of brings me back this full loop now that I'm 30, giving tips and tricks to 20-somethings as they navigate their career. So like, how can you actually be successful in your 20s instead of running around like a chicken with their head cut off, like what's going on? So all the failures and mistakes that my friends and I made, I'm highlighting them on a weekly basis on YouTube. So yeah.
Dude, I love that because as elder millennials as we are, I feel like we have to give back to those 90s babies that didn't get to like experience grunge or salt and pepper the first time around.
Exactly.
They need to learn because they didn't get to learn from all of, like, at least for me, it sounds like you were not raised by TV, but I got 5 brothers and sisters and my mom worked, so I was half raised by TV, and thank God there was like Family Matters on there, or who knows what kind of morals I'd have today. So, Lexi, thank you again. Everybody, check out Lexi, Unfiltered by Lexi B. Learn some stuff. Adult better. Don't be like us elder millennials who had to make it work after the recession and hope we didn't die of lack of health care. Thank you again, and thank you all for listening. As always, I'm Sami Gardner, and this is the Career Kickstart Show. Bye.
Change your career, change your life at CareerKickstartAcademy.com.